December 8, 2014, Hartlepool, England, a quiet coastal town, where most nights pass without incident. But inside a small home on Stephen Street, something unthinkable was unfolding. For 7 hours, a woman named Angela Wrightson would endure one of the most prolonged and brutal attacks in modern British criminal history. Angela Wrightson was 39 years old. She was known by neighbors as vulnerable, soft-spoken, and often alone. Her life had not been easy. Born and raised in England, Angela's early years were marked by instability. Like many who fall through the cracks, she struggled with addiction in adulthood. Alcohol became both an escape and a trap. Over time, it isolated her. Friends drifted away, family connections weakened, and Angela became increasingly vulnerable, living alone, in a modest home, often seeking companionship wherever she could find it, even if it wasn't safe. In the months leading up to her death, Angela had been seen socializing with younger people, teenagers, who lived nearby. Among them, 2 girls, just 13 and 14 years old, children, by every legal definition. But what would later be revealed would shock even the most experienced investigators. These girls didn't come from nowhere. Their own childhoods were troubled. Reports later described instability, exposure to violence, neglect, and behavioral issues. They had already come to the attention of authorities. There were signs, warning signs, aggression, disregard for rules, a need for attention that often turned destructive, but no one imagined what they were capable of. On that December evening, the 2 girls went to Angela's home. At first, there was nothing unusual. Angela let them in. She trusted them. Maybe she saw them as company, maybe even as a kind of family. What happened next would unfold slowly, then violently, then relentlessly. Over the next 7 hours, Angela would be beaten, humiliated, and tortured, using everyday objects found inside her own home. The attack was not quick, it was not impulsive, it escalated, and at some point, the girls began recording clips of the violence, captured on their phones, some of it uploaded to Snapchat, as if it were entertainment, as if it were a game. Outside, the neighborhood remained quiet, no alarms, no intervention. Inside, Angela was fighting for her life, and losing. By the time it was over, the scene left behind would be described by investigators as one of the most disturbing they had ever encountered. But the horror didn't end there, because what the girls did next would ultimately lead police straight to them. Inside Angela Wrightson's home, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a visit turned into something darker, then violent, then completely out of control. At some point during the evening, the tone changed. The girls began mocking Angela, taunting her, laughing. What started as verbal abuse escalated into physical violence. They struck her, at first with their hands, then with objects, whatever they could find. Household items became weapons. A television set, a coffee table, a mop, even decorative items. Nothing was off limits. Angela tried to defend herself, but she was overpowered, outnumbered, and increasingly weakened. The attack didn't happen all at once. It stretched on. Minutes turned into hours. The girls left the room at times, then returned, continuing where they left off. The violence became systematic, relentless. At points, they forced Angela to perform humiliating acts, degrading her, stripping her of dignity, as well as safety. And then, they began recording short clips, captured on their phones. Laughter can be heard, mocking voices, encouraging each other, treating the situation as if it were entertainment, not reality, not a human life. At least one of those clips would later be shared on Snapchat, sent out into the world, as if the suffering inside that room was something to be watched, something to be consumed. Angela's condition deteriorated severely. She suffered extensive injuries, over 100 separate wounds, blunt force trauma, internal damage, bruising across her body. At some point, she could no longer fight back. But the attack didn't stop. It continued, even after resistance faded, even after it was clear she was dying. Hours passed, 7 in total. By the time the girls finally left, Angela Wrightson was alone, barely alive, inside her own home, the same place. She had opened her door, in trust. Outside, nothing seemed different. No sirens, no urgency, just another quiet night. But inside that house, everything had changed, forever. The next day, concerns began to grow. Angela hadn't been seen, hadn't responded. Something wasn't right. When authorities entered the home, they were met with a scene few would ever forget. The living room, destroyed, furniture overturned, debris scattered, and Angela, unresponsive. The level of violence was immediately clear. This was not an accident. This was not a simple assault. This was sustained, deliberate, and extreme. Emergency services confirmed what investigators already feared. Angela Wrightson was dead. A murder investigation began immediately. Detectives started piecing together Angela's final hours. Who had been with her? Who had seen her? Who had access? It didn't take long for attention to turn toward the two girls. Witnesses had seen them. Neighbors recalled their presence. And then, the digital evidence surfaced. The videos, clips recorded during the attack, circulating, shared, discussed, among other young people. What the girls had documented became key evidence, not just of their presence, but of their actions, their mindset, their lack of hesitation. Police quickly identified them, two teenagers, just 13 and 14. When officers located them, there was no dramatic chase, no attempt to disappear. Instead, there was something more unsettling, a lack of urgency, a lack of understanding of what they had done. They were arrested, taken into custody, and questioned. What investigators would hear next would only deepen the shock. Inside the interrogation rooms, the reality began to set in, for investigators, for the community, and eventually, for the girls themselves. At first, there were attempts to minimize, to deflect, statements suggesting it wasn't meant to go that far, that it started as something else, that it got out of control. But the evidence told a different story. A prolonged attack, repeated actions, multiple opportunities to stop, and recordings that captured the mindset in real time. In court, the details were laid out, piece by piece, the duration, the brutality, the humiliation, the sheer number of injuries. The prosecution described it as torture, not just violence, but sustained cruelty. The defense pointed to their ages, their backgrounds, histories of neglect, exposure to harmful environments, psychological instability, but the severity of the crime could not be ignored. This was not impulsive. This was not momentary. This was hours, 7 hours, of continuous harm. The jury heard about the videos, the messages, the behavior after the attack, and ultimately, they reached a verdict. Both girls were found guilty of murder. The court imposed life sentences, with minimum terms to be served, reflecting both their ages and the gravity of their actions. The case sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. How could children commit such an act? What warning signs were missed? What systems failed? And how could something like this be prevented? For Angela Wrightson, justice came too late. Her life, marked by vulnerability, ended in unimaginable suffering. But her story remains a reminder of how quickly violence can escalate, of how technology can expose the darkest moments, and of how even the youngest individuals can commit acts that leave a permanent scar on everyone who hears about them.